All right, what's up, Moxyball fans? It's Jared, Zach, and Brad coming at you with the August 9th, 2016 MLB DFS podcast. We're just going to get right into it and talk about the Tuesday slate to help you prepare for some winning lineups. So it's been a while since we had our last podcast. Guys, what's happened lately that stands out to you in the world of DFS baseball? I mean, could be anything, but what do you got?
I want to know what the hell the Yankees are doing right now. Like, they're just giving away everybody. They're not really – I know they're building for the future, but they're not winning. Why are you letting A-Rod go when he's 4 home runs shy?
Because they're all tainted home runs, that's why. Tainted home runs.
But they're not tainted when it wasn't against the rules when he hit the home runs. People don't realize that PED use and steroids weren't against the rules. It's not cheating.
I don't know. We're talking about a pretty gray area. I'm not sure how that impacts. Not sure how that impacts DFS right now. So let's move it on to Brad, who maybe will have something more useful than what Zach just threw out there.
I want to know when the Jays will start to hit. I mean, after the All-Star break, you see the Vegas totals most nights, except maybe when they were on the road in KC, they're coming in around 5 runs. And I mean, it was the same case in both April and May, where night after night after night, they seem to be one of the top 3 stack options, and largely, for the most part, disappointed. I mean, sure, they got things going in June and carried it through into the All-Star break, but right now they're letting a lot of DFS fans down. I know that.
Yeah, that's for sure. They've kind of gotten a little cold. I think they're starting to get the ball going a little bit better, and they've got a pretty good 6-game stretch coming up at home against some mediocre pitching, so maybe that'll help them out. For me, it's just been how good the Twins' offense has actually been clicking over the last week or so. Max Kepler's gone crazy, true breakout year. Sano hit 2 bombs on Sunday. Dozier and Mauer are number 2 and number 3 in WAR over the last 2 weeks. Recent emergence of Eddie Rosario too. I mean, on paper they sound like a terrible team, but you really can't be taking them lightly, and I don't know about you guys, but I've been playing them a lot in my GPPs as some low-owned stacks. They've been doing some pretty good things for me. Maybe they'll keep it up, but they'll probably cool off at some point. But it's been a pretty big surprise, especially after they dealt Nunez.
I had to do a double take when I saw Joe Mauer over 5,000 on DraftKings multiple nights. I can't do it. I can't do it.
Even when he's hot, he's not a guy you can pay that kind of cash for because he's just such a low home run probability guy. There's just no chance. All right, so what about in terms of like a big surprise for you so far this year in the majors? What stands out?
Brad, you can go.
For me, it would be the emergence of really 3 bats, and I mean I'm sure there's more, but one being Max Kepler. I mean, he's not somebody that I really foresaw coming onto the scene like this. I mean, he had a cup of coffee a little earlier in the year, and then when he came back up, really took off, and now he's hitting in the 3-hole for the Twins and doing a real good job with that. Same with Naquin with Cleveland. Not the same batting order spot, but I mean, same sort of thing. He was up briefly and didn't really do a whole lot, got sent down, then came back up. And he was a big differentiator in a lot of GPPs for a good 2 or 3 week stretch in late June, early July. And the other one for me, and I have to keep talking myself out of overruling not putting Jonathan Villar in my lineups. I mean, day after day after day, I don't want to use him. I really don't. And I just have to tell myself, look at the numbers, and you know what, especially against left-handed pitching, he's generally the top option at that position on quite a lot of days. So for me, it would kind of be the guys that I didn't really think a whole lot that really, for the most part, have been cornerstones in a lot of my lineups, both in cash games and then with Naquin with a lot of GPPs about 2, 3, 4 weeks ago. So that's a big surprise for me.
Yeah, I feel like Naquin, I mean, his price has been really high on FanDuel lately, almost, the perfect guy to pay up for, and if you really want like a sub 5% hitter, because he's got he's not going to get a ton of ownership if he's hitting in the 8th spot. There's Zach downing some Moxie mug juice there. But it's yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned him, because I think on a lot of teams he'd be probably hitting right in the heart of that order, right? Like, think about, for a guy that hits right-handed pitching really well, he'd probably be in the 5 or 6 spot for many teams if they didn't have such a strong offense. What about you, Zach? Any thoughts on this one?
Well, I love the 3 hitters that he mentioned, but for me, what's really surprised me is how good the Marlins have been on offense, even with D. Gordon suspended. I don't think people really expected them to be in the top half in WOBA against it doesn't matter what side the pitcher's coming from. Barry Bonds has done a really good job coaching that team. You got players like Yelich and Ozuna who are just putting up monster numbers and nobody's giving them credit. Prado is a cheap guy using cash games almost nightly because he's just cheap and he's getting it done. He's getting on base every single night. And just that roster is loaded with hitters who are getting it done time and time again, and nobody's giving them any love.
All fair points. Yeah, Ozuna's been a really, really good story. I know he's cooled off a bit, but Stanton's sort of heated back up, and you mentioned Martin Prado as well. Yelich has been pretty consistent. For me, I had kind of 5 quick points. Brad already touched on Villar, so I'll kind of gloss over him. For me, good stories like Ian Desmond having a really good bounce-back season, Jose Altuve's massive power growth while maintaining all of his elite contact and on-base skills, which I find crazy impressive. Corey Seager being the number 7 player by WAR in his first full year of Major League Baseball was pretty crazy. And then when you think about Will Myers checking in only 3 spots later at number 10, after a really difficult start to his career, after multiple trades and some tough going, had some injuries as well, the fact that he's been putting up such monster numbers in Petco, I think is pretty impressive, and he's really put himself into the the early round conversation next year.
Yeah, he's been real impressive, especially when you factor in the park in San Diego. I mean, he'd be putting up the numbers that he had at the start of the year, I just would have laughed at you. I wouldn't have even entertained that conversation. So.
Yeah, he wasn't even on my radar for season long at all. But I mean, I've been playing him quite a bit in my Padres stacks, which have been a nice little place to go, I find, in GPPs lately, and he's been getting it done, which is kind of nice because he doesn't always have a ton of ownership. So let's turn our attention to the Tuesday slate. So what's a stat, matchup, or trend that you guys are using your advantage as you prep for the Tuesday slate? And Zach, let's toss it over to you first.
Well, the stat I'm really looking at is I'm looking at the mid-tier pitchers who have a high win probability. I'm not really finding spending up for pitching is working right now because they've just been letting it down. Like if you paid up for Cueto tonight, you're already let down because the Marlins have 5 runs. So I'm really looking at that high win probability in the mid-tier range. That's where it seems to be for me, where you're getting the most bang for your buck from pitchers. So there's a couple great pitchers I'm looking at in that $8,000 to $9,000 range.
Yep, fair enough. I'm sure we'll get to those in short order when we get into our picks. Brad, what about you?
The thing that jumps out to me is whether or not I want to roll the dice and take a free Mike Leake on DraftKings. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no way around it. He's been terrible his last 3 times out, but 4,500 salary against the Reds, it's going to be awfully tempting for me not to lock him in as my second starting pitcher tomorrow. With respect to hitting, I don't love Boston tomorrow. I know they check in for the 7 p.m. once you get rid of the Coors game in the afternoon. I know they check in with the highest total right now. I'm not fully taking what we saw from Severino early in the year at face value. I think he's got a lot better arm than what he showed early in the year. That said, I mean, Boston can swing it with the best of them, but I don't envision myself paying up for him tomorrow night. So for me, it'll kind of be a mix and match in cash games, and then I'll be going with a couple contrarian stack options, which I'll touch on a little later.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned a couple of things on my mind. The one thing I was going to say, what I'm kind of excited about for Tuesday slate is the fact that the Coors game's in the afternoon, so we don't have to worry about it in the evening for the bigger contest, particularly the GPPs. So I absolutely hate Coors for that sense. So it'll be nice to have that off the board. So let's just move over to pitching. You already talked a little bit about Mike Leake. I've got a note on him as well. Brad, let's throw it over to you. Who do you like? Who are your top two starters that you kind of like for the Tuesday slate?
I kind of like pairing Scherzer with Mike Leake. I'm going to have a hard time kind of peeling myself away from doing that, I think. I mean, Scherzer's expensive. There's no way around that. And Cleveland is a pretty tough matchup. I mean, they come into play in the top 5 as far as weighted OBA, both over the last 2 weeks and the last month. So the matchup definitely is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I mean, he's an elite arm, misses bats at a great clip, and last I checked, the line was at minus 200 for Washington. So I envision that sticking around there, especially on FanDuel. That's going to be hard to rip me away from taking Scherzer.
Yeah, especially with Bauer throwing like shit lately too. So it kind of helps.
And I mean, also the fact that Coors isn't in play makes it a little easier to throw a few value bats in there, definitely for cash games. For tournaments, I probably think it's a good spot to fade them. A couple options like Kenta Maeda. He's an intriguing option tomorrow. And I don't want to steal Zach's thunder. He was talking about a couple guys in the 8K range, so maybe turn it over to him.
Yeah, Zach, jump in.
Well, one name I really love is Matt Moore. I know he's playing he was on the Rays, and I was looking at he's playing the Marlins. I know I talked about the Marlins earlier, but Matt Moore, he's back. Like, he is fully healed from Tommy John surgery. He's getting it done. He's pitching 6 innings nightly, only giving up 1 or 2 runs. He's getting you right around a K per inning right now. I just love the price on Matt Moore. I think he's a small underdog right now, but I think he picks up the win because I don't see Tom Kohler not giving it up to the Giants bats. Another name, Rick Porcello at 9.1. He's been really consistent. The Yankees, like I mentioned earlier, they're just giving up on the season. So he's a great option. There's a bunch of names that I like. So, I mean, I'm going to have a hard time just choosing one, but I don't think you need to go up to a Max Scherzer or somebody like that tonight.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're not going to like what I have to say about Matt Moore later, but I can respect the play since he's in the National League now and did look pretty decent through his first start with the Giants. But I'm with you, Brad. I really like Leake for an SP2 on DK at $4,500. I mean, even though he's had a few rough outings lately, he isn't walking anyone. I mean, his Sierra is actually 8 runs lower than his ERA in his last 2 starts, and he's still getting ground balls at better than 55%. So I mean, he's getting nickeled and dimed to death for the most part, and that's going to turn eventually, and especially with Jay Bruce being gone from Cincy, I mean, that should kind of help his cause a little bit. It makes that lineup a little bit weaker. I think the second guy for me, I'm not sure I'm going to be paying up for Scherzer in cash games. I actually would rather play him in GPPs. I know it sounds a little crazy because he's a pretty big favorite, but I have a lot of respect for the Indians, and I think that's really what it comes down to for me. So the second guy that'll be in my lineups on DK is Kenta Maeda, who you mentioned, Brad. He's a favorite at about 180 right now. I like him for both sites. He's a pretty decent value. So those are my 2 guys. Zach, what about a bat that you're targeting, especially one stud? Who you got?
Man, there's a lot of bats I'm targeting, but I'll go with Nelson Cruz against Daniel Norris. Cruz is just he's elite. There's no other way to put it against a left-handed pitcher. Norris has pitched a lot better, but he's not going to be able to keep Cruz in the yard. Cruz is going deep tomorrow. Just put it down.
Dong of the day right there. You calling it?
I'm calling it.
Calling it now. All right, Brad, what about you?
For me, Josh Donaldson. I know I touched on the Jays earlier. A lot of people in the industry have talked about Donaldson versus lefties all year. He's actually gotten to the point where he's hitting righties just as good as lefties right now, which I know I found surprising when those numbers kind of came across my radar a few weeks back. This is, of course, looking over the past calendar year. But anyways, back to the matchup for Donaldson. He's facing Drew Smyly. As I mentioned, he's always hit left-handers really well. And I'm not a big batter versus pitcher guy. But when I look, he has 3 home runs and 17 at-bats. It's just nice icing on the cake for me. I know he's hit him well this year too, so all things being equal, I'm probably going to be heavily exposed with Donaldson in my lineups tomorrow.
Yeah, I like the Jays a lot as a stack on Tuesday. I think it'll be good. For me, and this is the one that I kind of laughed about when you mentioned Villar. It's hard for me to call him, like a stud bat per se, but man, he's been great in fantasy this year. I'm talking about Johnny Villar. He has hits in 5 straight and a steal in 3 of those 5 games. Tyrell Jenkins is easily one of the most hittable arms on the board, and for a guy that just needs to put the ball and play to leg out a base hit and then do some damage on the base pass, his floor is quite high in this matchup with a pretty equally high ceiling, in my opinion. I know it's a righty matchup for him, but it doesn't really matter for me. One value bet, just to complement your point on Cruz, Zach, for me is Gutierrez on DK. He's only $3,700 against a lefty. I didn't have a chance to take a look at his price point on FanDuel, but I think him and Cruz are a great GPP pairing, and you might even be able to get Cano, Seager, Dejo Lee, etc. active in a full stack. I mean, Goody has a 410 WOBA and 288 ISO against lefties over the last year's worth of at bats. I mean, those are elite numbers. And for a sub 4K price on DraftKings, I mean, I don't know how you can avoid that. Zach, what do you got for a value bet?
Well, you mentioned him when you were talking about Gutierrez. I like Lee of the Mariners. At home, he's elite, just like Cruz at home against left-handed. He's really showed that he can hit in American baseball coming over from Japan. At home versus lefties, he has an OPS of 948, an ISO of 298, a WOBA 401. You're getting him for just over $3,000 on DraftKings, under $3,000 on FanDuel. If you need savings, he's in my lineup.
Yeah, that's good value. What about you, Brad?
The big question is, will Clint Hurdle let him play? But I like John Jaso tomorrow if he's in the lineup. I mean, his numbers haven't been great on the year, but he's been ripping the cover off the ball over the last week or two when he's been in the lineup.
He's basically free, isn't he, on DraftKings?
Yeah, he's $2,900 on DraftKings, so I mean, he enables you to be able to spend up on the mound. If you do need salary relief, you can lock him in. Maybe if you take a more balanced approach on the mound. But he's got a 50% hard hit rate over his last 8 starts to go along with an average batted ball distance of 236 feet. So, I mean, he's hitting the ball real well, just not seeing the results. And, again, make sure you check the lineup on Tuesday to make sure he's in there. But if he is and you're looking to save some salary, I think he's a real strong option.
Yeah, I mean, and for a guy that's more of a contact hitter to be averaging over 230 feet with his fly ball, that's pretty decent pop for a guy with his profile. So definitely a guy I like as well. He was on my short list.
Yeah, and I mean, the Pirates are projected right now to score 4.7 runs according to Vegas.
Who are they facing?
San Diego, so Luis Perdomo tomorrow.
Yeah, he's a very hittable guy. He's got some interesting ground ball stuff, but he's not going to blow you away. What about some stacks, Brad? Do you have a stack or two as a more of like a safe kind of cash game stack that you're looking at?
For me, I'd be looking at. I like Houston tomorrow, and both the stacks I'm going to give probably won't be over 20% owned. That said, I feel like they're both safe. One's Houston against Hector Santiago. I mean, he's electric against lefties. Thing with Houston, all their good bats are right-handed. And I like a lot of the Houston bats tomorrow against Santiago. A second one I like Milwaukee. They're facing Tyrell Jenkins. I think they're going to check in with Adder around 5 when everything's all said and done. And they've been swinging the bats well. I know I used them tonight on the DraftKings curveball, and ownership was down. So I mean, to me that's just a bonus. I like their matchup a lot tomorrow against Jenkins.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me if they're kind of lower owned again because they aren't cheap. So I think you're gonna get some decent ownership by relief there. Zach, what about you?
The Cubs, first, no way I'm not playing the Cubs. They got Jared Weaver. He shouldn't be. Nobody on the Angels really should be in the in the majors. They all need to go to the minors. They need to start from scratch.
What about Mike Trout, best player in baseball?
I'm talking about pitching.
Oh, pitching.
Their pitching is awful.
You watch your mouth about my boy Matt Shoemaker.
Well, Shoemaker's about the only one on their team, but everybody else, Lincecum, Weaver, whoever else they throw out in the third, the fourth, and fifth spot, they need to go. They just need to go all back to the minors or to their couch. So I'm really on the Cubs, especially because Weaver's a bit of a reverse blitz, and he's playing at Wrigley. And right now, we don't know what the wind's going to do, but I think the wind might be blowing out tomorrow. So if it's blowing out, I'm definitely on the Cubs. The other stack I really like is the Mariners. We talked about three of their guys. I'm just not a huge Daniel Norris fan. I love the Mariners tomorrow.
Well, you guys both mentioned the two that I was gonna talk about, being Milwaukee, who I really like as well. Jenkins has a 6.36 Sierra and some of the lowest, whiff and chase rates on the board over the last couple of weeks. So they're going to put the ball in play and I think do some serious damage. And then the Cubs against Weaver, I think, is a bit of a gimme. I think they'll be very chalky. So if you do think about them for GPPs, probably pair them with a really low-owned stack as well. Speaking of low-owned stacks, what are one of those that you guys like for GPPs tomorrow that give you a little bit of separation from the pack?
I want to go first because y'all talked about Mike Leake, and I'm stacking against Mike Leake. Y'all talk about how bad the Reds are since they traded away Jay Bruce, but the Reds actually have not been that bad as people think, especially Joey Votto. Joey Votto's been the best hitter in baseball since the break.
Yeah.
They got a lot of power guys. I'm looking over the last 14 days. I mean, they're not as bad as you would look. They're 15th in WOBA over the last 14 days, so they're right in the middle of the pack. Mike Leake, I'm just not a believer. Stack the Reds. They're going to score at least 6 runs.
Oh, okay. All right. That's definitely it actually wouldn't surprise me if they have a decent level of ownership because I think you're right. I think a lot of people don't respect Mike Leake, but you never know. Brad, what about you?
For me, I'm gonna hammer home the Brewers, and I do think they'll be a contrarian option again. Like I'm looking at the ownership levels right now from Monday night. Villar and Braun both were decently owned, 20.2% and 16% in the DraftKings curveball. But then looking at Chris Carter, 5.5%, who he's always one of my favorite GPP options. Big boomer bust guy. Scooter Gennett, who for some reason is hitting in the 4 spot, but he's hitting in the 4 spot, 7.1%, and then Hernan Perez at 7.4%. He runs a little. He's been swinging it real well, and the fact that they haven't lit up the scoreboard tonight, I think might even help drive down the ownership levels a little more tomorrow. But I like them as an against the grain play tomorrow against Tyrell.
Don't hate on Gannett. He's actually hitting the ball really well. I think he's on like a 11, 12 game hitting streak, and he always is a cheap source of power. He's one of my favorite players against right-handed pitching because he's just that cheap source of power at second base. So don't hate on him. He needs to be in the 4-hole.
Have you seen?
He's got a great price.
Yeah.
I use him, so.
Yeah, it's just easy. It's easy to have some fun with a guy named Scooter. I think that's what it comes down to for Brad. For me, I don't want to be a homer. I know you guys probably know, Brad and I are both from Toronto, but I really like the Jays at home against Smiley. I don't know if they're going to be terribly low owned, but they're not cheap, and especially if you're going to run a guy like Scherzer, which I think a lot of people are going to do. I can't see a lot of ownership there. But getting Drew Smiley, who's a fly ball pitcher on the road, he's given up 55% of his contact through 5 balls over the last couple starts. And even though the results have been pretty good, when you give up 32% hard contact and a lot of fly balls with a team that has high-end power and great numbers against lefties, including, in my opinion, one that they have a decent amount of experience against, we could have a recipe for a big crooked number with Toronto and Tampa on the Toronto side in particular on Tuesday night. So Zach, you kind of said maybe your crazy prediction that the Reds were going to score 6. Is that what you said?
Yeah, but that's not my crazy prediction.
Oh, you got another one for us? All right. Why don't you lead it off?
The A's score the most runs tomorrow.
Who are they facing?
They're facing a left-handed pitcher, Baltimore. I don't know why they traded the young Cuban. I can't remember his name for
Are you talking Wade Miley?
Yeah, because the Orioles AAA affiliate is where I'm from, and I go all the time, and that guy could pitch. If Wade Miley can't pitch, so I don't know why they traded him. And he had a gem the other day against the Red Sox, and Wade Miley stunk it up like usual. So I don't know why they made that trade, but that's on them.
I think anyone anyone that could throw a strike and maybe have 200 inning upside was exactly what the Orioles needed. They just haven't had any good starters other than Chris Tillman for a number of years. But just to throw something back at you, Wade Miley he actually crossed my list when I was thinking about potential guys to play. He actually has a 2.53 SIERA and a 35% chase rate over the last couple weeks with 52% ground balls and a 10.5 K per 9. So he's actually been surprisingly good over his last couple times out. But Oakland does hit lefties very well. So they could easily bust out, and it would not shock me if they were actually quite low owned as well. So it might have a little bit of GPP value there. Brad, what about you? Got something crazy you think is going to happen on Tuesday?
Yeah, John Jaso is going to hit a home run.
If Josh Tolley can do it, then he can too.
He has about as much power as I do, so I think it's going out on a pretty big limb. But I think if he gets the call, I like his chances of going yard.
Yeah, but you're a pitcher, so that's like really a big insult to John Jaso. So for me, and this is kind of coming back to the point that I was gonna make earlier about Matt Moore. I actually think the Marlins are going to put up at least 5 on Moore and get somewhere between 7 and 10 runs overall when push comes to shove. They've got a few really good. Oh, Zach's getting riled up. They've got a few really good. They've got a few really good lefty mashers, especially with Ozuna and Stanton. Yelich hits them pretty well. D. Gordon can put the bat in the ball. Prado's been playing well. But been very mediocre lately. He actually has one of the worst SIERAs over the last couple of weeks on the board and has a 7.1 walk rate in his last 2 games. So kind of ridiculous. So I would think that they're going to do some damage against him, and I'll definitely take the over on the Marlins if I get a chance to. One last question before we sign off. I know this has been a bit of a longer podcast, so if you've been listening the whole time, good on you. We appreciate it. What's one name that you guys feel like you've been playing almost every night in MLB DFS? I mean, I'm sure we all kind of have our best friends and who are are the guys that we tend to play all the time. Who you got?
For me, it's gonna make y'all happy. Devin Travis. He's been in every single one of my lineups, every single night on FanDuel for the last couple weeks. He's a righty masher. Now he's at the top of the lineup. He's doing it again tonight. He already has a triple, a single, and 2 runs scored. If he's going to continue to be under 3,000 when they face a right-handed pitcher, he needs to be in your lineup.
Yep, fair enough. He's done some good damage on Monday. Brad, what about you?
For me, I'll split it by site. Manny Machado on DraftKings. For whatever reason, the algorithm really isn't liking him. And I know he hasn't been ripping the cover off the ball, but he's just too cheap. He's checking in around 4K right now. And I mean, Baltimore can swing it. They've got a great offense, and he's a really good way to get fairly cheap exposure. And he's probably their best bat to boot. So he's in the lineup for me most days on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I've been pretty heavy on Max Kepler for a while. I mean, he's been over 5K on DraftKings. He's been checking in, generally speaking, in the low 3s on FanDuel. So good source of salary relief, and he's been producing. So those would be my 2 guys.
Yeah, for sure. I actually had a little bit of love for Kepler as well. I mean, it's not going to be one player in particular, but like I said at the beginning, it feels like every day or night I have at least a couple lineups that stack the Twins. They've been a great source of value in low ownership, especially since they've been underdogs for the most part guys like Kepler, Sano, Dozier have been mainstays for me. I wish I could say I ran Joe Mauer a little bit more lately, but he did make a few appearances, but I definitely was not very heavy on him just because he's kind of like the John Jaso of the American League. So you know what? I think that that wraps it up for us on our August 9th slate. We record this on Monday night, so that's why you heard a mix of Tuesday and tonight's being and tomorrow night's being said. So appreciate you staying with us. Thanks again for listening, and best of luck out there on the Tuesday slate, guys. Peace.